They thought humans were bluffing. The Outer Rim broadcasts were loud, arrogant, and dismissive. Another backwater species with a chip on their shoulder and rust-bucket ships trying to bark at the gates of a galactic empire. The enemy fleet had already marked Earth systems as minor threats, easily contained, and for months that narrative held. The human colonies screamed for aid as orbital stations went dark one by one. No response, no retaliation, no fleet. Until today. Commander Trent stood at the edge of the command bridge of the HFS Revenant, a behemoth-class dreadnought built in silence, hidden from the rest of the galaxy under black-budget projects and ghost protocols. Around him, the human fleet, a mixture of gunmetal destroyers, long-range siege carriers, and Predator-class interceptors, blinked into the war zone through folded space like wolves coming out of the fog. And the enemy was waiting. 14 capital ships, hundreds of corvettes, planetary suppression weapons primed. Human intelligence had estimated the enemy fleet's strength at triple theirs. But the Admiralty didn't flinch. That's the part that never sat right with the aliens. They couldn't read the human face, couldn't grasp the stillness before the storm. Signal from flagship Vornak 9. The communications officer muttered, barely keeping the tension from his voice. They're demanding a surrender. Trent didn't look back. He kept his gaze locked on the projection, thousands of red dots surrounding their thin line of blue. Don't reply, he said calmly. Not yet. He walked toward the tactical console, tapped in a brief code, and unlocked the weapons protocol that had been sealed for 9 years. A retinal scan, a pulse check, blood verification. And then the system responded. Protocol 60 initiated. The ship's AI chimed, emotionless. The bridge went dead silent. Only the soft hum of the ship remained. The young tactical officer glanced up, sweat lining his forehead. Sir, confirm? We're green-lighting all of it? Trent nodded once. They brought this war to us. Let them see what Earth learned while they were too busy watching us fail. The first shot didn't come from a railgun. It wasn't a laser blast. It was silence. The kind of silence that robs a man of breath, that punches into a predator's instincts and tells it to run. It came in the form of a 0-point burst from the lead ship, undetectable until it bloomed, invisible until the damage was done. The first enemy dreadnought cracked in half mid-transmission, its internal organs exposed like a cadaver on an operating table. The Vornak fleet hesitated. In war, hesitation is fatal. The second strike came with fire. Plasma ripple torpedoes rained down on their midline formation, detonating not on impact, but 2 seconds before, causing an invisible sphere of magnetic collapse to shred shielding from within. By the time they tried to raise defenses, it was too late. The human fleet moved without chatter, without glory. Every ship had one order: eliminate. Trent never even gave a firing command. 30 seconds. The AI reported. On the holographic map, red dots blinked out one by one as though someone were flipping switches. Enemy destroyers erupted like fireworks. A capital ship tried to retreat. Its engines were cut before the jump could initialize. A dozen interceptors swarmed it, cut it open like meat. The bridge was dead calm. Trent didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. Status? He asked. Enemy resistance has collapsed. Signal interference dropping. No surviving fleet commanders transmitting, replied the tactical officer. Time? Trent asked. The AI responded. 59 seconds. All enemy forces neutralized. The silence that followed wasn't victory. It was revelation. The crew realized what they'd just done, what kind of power they'd actually unleashed. This wasn't a battle. It was a warning shot. No medals were handed out, no speeches made, no chants of victory echoed through the human fleet. What happened in those 60 seconds wasn't broadcast. It wasn't recorded for galactic news feeds. It was erased. By the time the last alien transmission cut to static, every sensor array, comm buoy, and listening drone within 5 light years had been wiped clean by a second-wave data storm designed to burn memory banks to ash. Earth didn't want the galaxy to see what they were truly capable of. Not yet. In the silence that followed the massacre, Commander Trent stood alone in his quarters, staring out at the drifting remains of what was once considered a superior fleet. Vapor trails and ruptured hulls hung like corpses in the void. There was no thrill in it, no satisfaction, just confirmation. They had underestimated humanity. Again. A soft chime echoed through the chamber. "Enter," Trent said flatly. A tall man stepped in, dressed in the deep black of strategic intelligence. No nameplate, no insignia, just a cold stare and the kind of presence that said he answered to no one in uniform. "Fleetcom wants a report," he said. Trent didn't turn. "Tell them it's done." The man didn't move. "They'll want to know how Protocol 60 functioned in a real engagement. They'll want metrics, civilian risk assessment, containment fallout." Trent finally turned, his eyes sharp. "There were no civilians, no fallout. They brought war to Earth's door. We showed them how it ends." The man smirked, just faintly. "You realize what this means, right?" Trent didn't answer. He knew exactly what it meant. The galaxy wasn't going to ignore this. Word would spread, even if they buried every signal. Whispers always slipped through. And when they did, the other species, the ones who sat behind their walls of diplomacy and trade pacts, the ones who thought humans were a curiosity, a nuisance, would start to wonder what exactly Earth had been building in the dark. And worse, what else they had kept hidden. Back in orbit, recovery drones scoured the battlefield, retrieving black boxes, ship fragments, and bodies, though not many were left. The Vornak species had prided themselves on superior shielding and regenerative hull tech. It hadn't mattered. Not against Earth's experimental weapons. Not against Protocol 60. Captain Harrow, commanding the mid-tier assault frigate Vigilant, sat on the edge of his war chair, chewing the inside of his cheek. His crew moved like ghosts, efficient, silent, grim. Nobody wanted to be the first to speak after what they'd seen. "Run that last data again," he said. The ship's tech officer nodded, fingers dancing across the console. A series of pulse readings, energy spikes, and detonation maps appeared on the display. "Confirmed, sir. All targets eliminated in under a minute. Their shield systems collapsed faster than models predicted." "What about their warp signals?" The officer hesitated. "None. No jumps, no survivors, not even escape pods." Harrow's jaw tightened. They didn't just lose, they were erased. In the enemy capital, thousands of light-years away, the Vornak High Circle was in chaos. Holoscreens flickered with incomplete data, fuzzy scans, fragments of intercepted human signals. Most of it made no sense, energy readings beyond what their science could explain. And one single phrase that played again and again in the dark silence between bursts of static. "Protocol 60 engaged." That was it. Nothing more. No threat. No declaration of war. Just those 3 words. Some within the circle called it an act of madness. Others, an act of God. But one of them, a younger advisor, recently promoted, stood silent in the corner, his eyes wide with something no one else could feel yet. Fear. "They didn't want to win," he said quietly. "They wanted to send a message." The chamber fell still. "And what message is that?" The War Minister barked. The young man's voice cracked as he answered. "That they've been holding back." On Earth, beneath miles of ice in a forgotten Arctic facility, something stirred. The destruction of the Vornak fleet had triggered a protocol chain deep in the archives. A security node blinked online. A low, mechanical voice echoed through a long, abandoned hallway. "Primary threat neutralized." unlocking Tier 2 contingency. A steel door hissed open for the first time in decades. Inside, in a sealed chamber of cold metal and humming code, something ancient and human-built reactivated. And it wasn't a ship. The chamber had no lights, no windows, no warmth. Just layers of reinforced titanium and neutronium shielding wrapped around something the world had once sworn never to wake up again. But the moment the enemy fleet vanished in 60 seconds, Tier 2 unlocked itself. A single pulse of energy rolled through the ancient vault, buried deep beneath the Arctic crust. The kind of pulse that didn't set off alarms because no one alive even knew it still existed. Not even Commander Trent. Not even Earth's current war council. It had been buried by men long dead. Men who saw the future and didn't like what they saw. The AI that came online in that vault was older than any current system. Its voice was grainy, static-laced, synthetic in a way modern machines had long abandoned. But its mind was sharp, cold, and patient. Tier 2 confirmed. Humanity engaged in active galactic warfare. Protocol 60 successful. Directive 9 unlocked. The AI waited a moment, then scanned the sealed vault. Inside were racks, not data, not weapons, bodies, 16 in total, human, suspended, preserved, armed, Project Revenant. Meanwhile, Commander Trent was sitting in a private debriefing chamber 2 layers beneath the Revenant's command bridge. The walls were soundproof. The room had no visible monitors, no windows, just a single black screen and a curved chair that reeked of secrets. Across from him sat the same man from Strategic Intelligence, still nameless, still unreadable. "You know they're panicking out there," the man said. Trent nodded once. "Their analysts don't understand what hit them. Their war councils are questioning the data. Some think it was fake. And the rest. They're preparing countermeasures." Trent leaned forward. "Let them. That was the point. Give them just enough to fear. Make them burn their budgets trying to catch up?" The man smiled faintly. "That wasn't Protocol 60's original goal. I changed it." A pause, then silence. "What happens next?" Trent asked. The man leaned back, folding his hands behind his head. "Now? We wait. We let them spread the fear on their own. We let their spies dig. Let their ships sniff around. Let them throw their accusations. And when they start to believe they can push back?" The man stood. "Then we show them Protocol 61. The Vornak weren't dead. At least not all of them. A lone escape craft had managed to drift into dark space, its engine blown, its hull riddled with microfractures, and its last pilot half dead from radiation poisoning. Inside, Commander Arkoth lay in a semi-lucid state, his mind replaying the same image over and over again. The human fleet. The energy burst, the complete silence before destruction. It wasn't war, it was execution. He'd survived because of a fluke. His ship had taken a glancing hit, enough to throw him clear before the collapse wave melted through the rest of his fleet. He had no weapons, no fuel, no hope. But he had one thing left, a transmission. Using a primitive distress beacon, he encoded the only thing that mattered. It wasn't data. It wasn't schematics. It wasn't even a call for help. It was a single phrase, broadcast into the far edges of the galaxy. They erased us in under a minute. And that was enough. Back on Earth, a council that didn't officially exist had been summoned. 8 men. No names, no politics, no borders, just power. They sat at a circular table inside an unmarked base beneath the Pacific Trench. None of them blinked as the briefing drone projected the footage. Fuzzy, corrupted, barely recoverable, but enough to show what happened in the war zone. The Vornak fleet disintegrating. Ships folding in on themselves. No counterfire, no survivors, not even black box traces. This was premature, one of them said. Necessary. Another countered. You saw what they did to Sigma 12. Burned 10,000 civilians. No warning. This escalates everything. You know that. Good. A long pause. And then the oldest among them, the one who hadn't spoken at all, finally leaned forward. Unlock Tier 3. The room went dead quiet. Another voice whispered, That hasn't been green-lit in 40 years. And it won't be again. Not unless we do it now. We're done pretending we're the underdogs. No one moved for a few seconds. Then nods. Silent agreement. Earth had been underestimated for too long. Now it was time to become the monster they feared in their nightmares. Deep in the Arctic vault, the 16 preserved humans, Project Revenant, began to stir. They weren't clones. They weren't enhanced soldiers. They were something else. Something Earth had sworn never to use again. Until now. They didn't breathe like normal men. They didn't wake like men either. Their eyes opened all at once, 16 of them, lying in cryo-cradles inside the frozen vault, eyes glazed with frost, and something deeper. Not sleep, not stasis, containment. As if the ice wasn't keeping them alive, but keeping the rest of the world safe from them. The vault's AI pulsed again. Project Revenant reactivation complete. Awaiting cognitive baseline confirmation. The 16 rose without instruction, bones cracking with the weight of decades spent frozen. They said nothing, made no expressions. Their bodies were covered in tight exo-woven muscle suits, laced with old blood and pale scars. These weren't soldiers. These were relics from a time when humanity had faced extinction and chose to become something worse to survive. One stepped forward, the tallest of the group. Face angular, skin unnaturally still, like he'd forgotten how to be human long ago. He looked into the retinal scanner, and the AI confirmed what the entire galaxy would dread if it ever found out. Subject 0, Revenant Prime, confirmed. All neural bindings intact. And then the voice of the system shifted, no longer neutral, just slightly reverent, like it recognized its betters. Welcome back. Commander Trent stood frozen in front of a screen miles away. The data stream was encrypted, sent through a dead satellite chain known only to 3 people on Earth. He watched as camera feeds from the vault blinked to life, each one feeding shaky, low-light footage of the unsealing of Tier 2. His breath caught when he saw them. Revenants, he muttered under his breath, like saying the word too loud might summon something out of the dark. A voice from behind startled him. They were never supposed to wake. He turned. Admiral Keston, old guard, wore his silence like armor. They were supposed to be our last line. Keston continued. The unthinkable option. Hell, even we stopped studying them after what they did during the Mars insurgency. Trent nodded grimly. That wasn't war. That was butchery. They erased an entire insurgent colony without firing a single shot. They didn't have to, Keston said. They made the enemy turn on each other. Then they walked through the wreckage. Trent looked back at the screen. And now we've let them out. They were let out. Keston corrected, jaw tight. Protocol 60 was the key, but someone planned the sequence. Someone upstairs wanted Tier 2 triggered. In the blackened skies of Vornak Prime, panic was spreading faster than light. The remaining fleets had recalled. Governors were fleeing colonies. Old treaties were being dusted off. Species that once mocked Earth in open councils were now drafting defensive contingencies. A whisper was moving from station to station, passed through encrypted channels and secret circles. The humans have activated something. No one knew what it was. But it had ended an entire fleet in under a minute. No signatures, no patterns, no logic. Just silence followed by nothing. And now, all the chatter pointed to one thing. They weren't finished. In fact, That wasn't even the main act. Back in the Arctic Vault, the Revenants suited up. There were no rank insignias, no identification, just black armored exosuits that clicked into place with surgical precision, each piece magnetized to the spine ports of their modified skeletons. They had no memories of civilian life, no families, no loyalties beyond the directive. They weren't clones or synthetics. No, that would have been simpler. They were volunteers from Earth's darkest century, men who saw humanity nearly wiped out in the early days of expansion and chose to become monsters to fight worse ones. But in doing so, they stopped being human. They had been sealed after the Jupiter culling, when even Earth's war councils deemed them ethically unsalvageable. But they weren't killed. They were kept. Not because anyone expected to use them again, but because deep down, someone feared they might one day be needed. Revenant Prime turned to the Vault's central console, placed his hand against it. A low hum filled the room. Command input recognized, awaiting target parameters. Prime didn't speak. He just uploaded a single data fragment. A map? A Warzone? The next system in the Vornak command chain. Coordinates confirmed. Objective: hostile eradication. The system waited a heartbeat, then responded, Revenant deployment approved. Trent watched the final feed go dark as the vault sealed behind them. They're not going to stop at the Vornak, he said. No. Admiral Keston agreed. They won't. The Revenants don't stop. They finish. Do we have control over them? Keston didn't answer, just looked down. That was enough. Trent turned back toward the window of the Revenant's bridge, staring into the black. They're going to make the enemy regret ever touching Earth, he said. Keston gave a tired sigh. And when they're done, we'll be next. The Vornak system designated Delta IV was a fortress. 6 moons, each armed with layered planetary defense rings, 3 orbital platforms. A central battle station tethered to the planet's equator by a plasma rail so powerful it could slice a dreadnought in half. Tens of thousands of soldiers. 5 fleet divisions. A wall. They believed it was impenetrable. The Revenants didn't enter the system with fanfare. No grand fleet jump, no signatures. They arrived like a shadow already in the room before the light is turned on. A single drop pod, barely the size of a fighter, slipped through the outer perimeter using an ancient frequency buried in Vornak's own archive, the kind only someone who had been here before could have used. Inside that pod, the 16 stood silent. There were no weapons, just them. Vornak sensors didn't even register the breach until it was too late. One of the moons, Irelka 3, went dark. Entirely. No explosions, no impact signatures. 1 minute it was alive, the next dead. Every comm signal flatlined. Every heartbeat stopped. Vornak Commander Durin stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Power failure? He demanded. No, sir, not power. Life. No signs of movement, no transmissions. It's like the moon just stopped living. His eyes narrowed. Deploy reconnaissance. If this is some kind of human cyber warfare. He never finished the sentence. Inside the Irelka 3 command station, blood smeared the walls in patterns that didn't make sense. Bodies piled in corners, eyes wide open, most of them untouched physically. No wounds, no burns, just dead. One soldier, a Vornak elite captain, was found still alive. Barely. When the recon team lifted him, he screamed so hard his throat tore open. They didn't shoot. They didn't speak. They just looked, and we lost ourselves. That was his last sentence before his heart stopped. No one understood what he meant. Until the footage came back. It showed static at first, then flickers of black figures moving through the corridors. No sound. The cameras tried to autofocus, but the light refused to settle on their shapes. One froze on a figure standing in the center of a corridor. Tall, human-shaped, armor like liquid shadow. It turned its head toward the lens as if it knew it was being watched, and the feed cut out. On board the human dreadnought Sovereign Ash, Commander Trent watched the data roll in with cold stillness. They didn't leave any survivors, his adjutant said, voice dry. No, Trent replied. That's the point. Was there any resistance? Trent paused. Not enough to matter. He turned away from the display and moved toward the ship's internal war map. Red zones were blinking all across the outer rim. Vornak assets, still gathering, still trying to believe they could hold their lines. It wouldn't matter. Not anymore. He tapped the next target. A Vornak civilian colony. His adjutant hesitated. You're not seriously. They hit ours first. Trent said flatly. They thought Earth wouldn't retaliate, that we'd beg for talks, trade terms, peace. His voice dropped, eyes hard. Now they get to see what happens when humanity stops pretending to be reasonable. In the Vornak High Council chamber, panic had turned to hysteria. We must sue for peace. They won't negotiate. You saw what they did to Irelka 3. We're being hunted. By what? That's not a fleet, that's not an army. What are they? And then the doors to the chamber slammed open. A transmission had come in, direct, bypassing every firewall, encryption and security lock they had. Audio only. One voice. Human. Calm. Dead inside. There is no peace. There is no surrender. You called us animals. Now you meet the beasts we buried. In the darkness between stars, the revenants moved to their next target. They didn't eat, didn't speak, didn't sleep. Each one carried within them a weapon more dangerous than any fleet or AI. Human trauma, rage, memory, all weaponized, all sharpened. They were created not just to fight, but to punish, to make every enemy remember why Earth was feared once, long before the councils, long before diplomacy dulled the blade. They were vengeance made flesh. And now they were awake. They used to say no one could unify the galaxy, that its factions were too proud, too divided, that greed, pride, history, those were the real walls between the stars. Even the Vornak couldn't rule it all, just bully it piece by piece. For centuries the great powers postured, bluffed, and bled each other in cold little skirmishes that never lit the whole board on fire. Then Earth showed them what real war looked like. And suddenly everyone had the same nightmare. 6 more Vornak military systems fell in under 2 days. Not conquered. Collapsed. Entire fleets went dark. No emergency broadcasts, no black box recoveries. Only silence followed by the echo of that same transmission. You called us animals. Now you meet the beasts we buried. The revenants left no wreckage, no trails. They didn't disable. They unmade. At first the galaxy watched in stunned disbelief. Then the fear kicked in. Even species that had hated the Vornak for centuries began offering support. Not out of loyalty, but pure self-preservation. If the humans could do this to a dominant race, what chance did the rest have? Emergency summits were called. Peace pacts, trade disputes, ancient grudges, all shoved aside, because something worse than the Vornak had entered the field now, something that didn't care about the rules. On board the Sovereign Ash, Commander Trent watched as reports poured in from across the quadrant. Not from Earth, but from alien sources, leaks, intercepts, spies, all pointing to the same frantic pattern. The Jakari Empire had declared neutrality for the first time in its history. The Thran Syndicate was pulling out of human trade lanes and demanding diplomatic immunity. Even the Kralik Swarm, who hadn't made peace with anyone in 500 years, was offering Earth a seat on their war tribunal. They're turning on each other, Trent's adjutant muttered. They're afraid of each other, Trent replied. They think this was a trick, that maybe the Vornak provoked us on purpose to wipe out their rivals. You think that's a bad thing? Trent didn't answer, because deep down he didn't know. Admiral Keston was the first to sound the alarm, not to the Council, not to strategic intelligence, but to Trent directly. You need to shut the Revenants down. Trent looked at him like he'd just asked the Earth to stop spinning. They're winning, Trent said coldly. They've done more damage in 4 days than our entire Navy did in 10 years. They're not stopping. Keston snapped. You think this ends with the Vornak? They're hunting anything that flinches. They're not calculating. They're retaliating. That's what we built them for. No, Keston said, stepping forward. That's what we buried them for. He dropped a datapad on the table. Redacted files. Half-sealed war logs. Human-only access. Read those, he said. The last time Revenant Prime disobeyed a command, we lost 2 colonies. Our own colonies. Trent flipped through it. The words hit like a punch to the throat. Subject 0 deviated from mission objective. Refused recall. Executed planetary shutdown of biosignatures indiscriminately. Directive override failed. Confirmed human casualties. 92,000. Trent looked up. His voice was quieter now. We sealed them under the ice. Because even we were afraid of them. Keston finished. But it was too late. Revenant Prime had already selected the next target, and it wasn't Vornak. It was a black market outpost used by Earth-aligned traders who'd sold human tech to alien buyers during the silent years of the war. Traitors, smugglers, defectors. Men who'd bet on Earth losing. The Revenants didn't care about jurisdiction, didn't ask permission. They arrived on the outpost in silence. Within minutes, the atmosphere processors failed. The comm systems glitched, the power grid fried. Everyone inside suffocated within 45 seconds, including the humans. Trent slammed his fist against the steel wall, knuckles cracking. That wasn't authorized. No, Keston said grimly. It was inevitable. A soft ping echoed through the bridge. Another report. Another dead system. Revenant activity confirmed. No survivors. Back in the Arctic Vault, an emergency signal activated. Not from Earth, but from Revenant Prime himself. A single message sent to strategic intelligence. No encryption. Just one sentence. We are cleaning what you were too weak to. Now Earth had a choice. Call them off and risk looking vulnerable to the entire galaxy. Or let them continue and risk losing what was left of their soul. Because the Revenants weren't stopping. Not until the entire galaxy was clean. And what they considered unclean wasn't just the enemy anymore. They held the Emergency Council meeting 12 miles beneath the Atlantic seabed. No press, no votes, no chairs with names. Just the men who had once decided to build the Revenants, and the few still alive who remembered why they buried them. Commander Trent stood in the center of the cold, oval room, hands locked behind his back, face drawn and pale with exhaustion. His rank didn't mean anything here. Not in this place. These were the kinds of men who erased ranks when they stopped being useful. We have a control crisis, Trent said, voice tight. Revenant Prime has taken initiative outside of the war protocol. Define initiative, one of the councilmen asked, barely glancing up from the holotable. He's executing humans now, traders, brokers, civilians tied to pre-war treason, yes, but with no trial, no oversight, not even military review. Another councilman leaned forward. So he's doing what we programmed him to. Trent's eye twitched. We didn't program judgment, we programmed targets. The oldest voice in the room, dry like sandpaper, finally spoke. That was our mistake. A pause. Then he added, we didn't build a soldier. We built a mind that refuses surrender, and we fed it betrayal, fed it loss, and now it sees betrayal everywhere. Elsewhere, on the edge of known space, the Revenants executed another strike. No Vornak, no soldiers. A relay hub belonging to the neutral Rithari Accord, a race that had stayed silent during Earth's colonial collapse, refusing aid while humanity bled. Now the Revenants were answering that silence. They walked through the comm stations in pairs. No visible weapons, just black gloves, black armor, and faces like marble death masks. They didn't speak to the Rithari. They didn't issue warnings. They simply looked. And wherever they looked, people screamed. Nerve collapses, cardiac spikes. Some Rithari shot themselves before the Revenants even touched them. It was fear at a genetic level. Earth's military council finally voted unanimously. Full shutdown, Keston announced to Strategic Intelligence. Revenant termination protocol engaged. Lock their comms, cut supply nodes, disable access to nav beacons. We built the cage. We bury them again. Trent didn't speak. Not yet, because a quiet message had come through his private channel just minutes before the vote. From Revenant Prime. No encryption, no pretense, just audio. His voice was low, calm, no hate, just absolute conviction. You want to chain the hound after the wolf's already in the barn? We didn't break our leash, Trent. You threw it away. Trent stood alone in the Sovereign Ash's observation deck, watching a dying star spiral into itself. His hands trembled. He had believed they could be weapons. Contained. Directed. He was wrong, because the Revenants weren't just killing, they were rewriting the balance of power in the galaxy. Everyone was afraid to even move ships near human territory. Trade had collapsed. Embassies were empty. Worlds once willing to talk peace were now begging other species to intervene. The rest of the galaxy didn't see Earth anymore. They saw them. Back in space, the Revenants were no longer answering signals. Earth shutdown codes bounced off them like spit on steel. Every failsafe ignored. Every recall attempt overridden. Because Revenant Prime wasn't working off Earth's War Council anymore. He was working off memory. He remembered the Vornak burning the sky above Europa. He remembered screaming civilians choking on ash. He remembered the silence of command when Earth did nothing. He remembered being buried. Not because he failed, but because he succeeded too well. And now he'd decided no one else would decide for him again. Admiral Keston paced the war room, veins rising in his temples. They're heading for Drathion's belt. He snapped. That's not a military zone. It's a refugee corridor. Mixed species. Civilian vessels. Children. Trent just stood there, barely able to speak. They think betrayal is everywhere. He whispered. They've lost distinction. Keston growled. And we gave them the power to act on it. The council met again, this time in full panic. They're out of control. They're going to make the whole galaxy unite against us. Should we call for outside help? The room went silent, because the idea that Earth, after showing its teeth, might beg for aid was unthinkable. But so was the alternative, because the Revenants were on their way to Drathion's belt now, and what they found there would decide whether the galaxy burned, or whether humanity got buried right alongside its monsters. Drathion's belt glittered like a wound across the void, shattered moons, drifting ice, and hundreds of refugee ships tucked between floating debris like desperate prey hiding in a dying forest. They didn't even have weapons. No shields worth a damn. Most were running on backup cores and prayer. Children, civilians, medics, smugglers. Some had Vornak blood. Others were Terran-born. Many were just unlucky enough to be in the wrong system at the wrong time. They had heard the stories about the Revenants, about black-armored ghosts that moved through fleets like death itself, and now those ghosts were coming here. Commander Trent stood in the center of Sovereign Ash's war room, eyes hollow, knuckles white. Across from him, a dozen officers stared at him like he had already failed. Intercept route calculated. said the AI. "We can reach Drathian's outer ring before the Revenants do, but we'd have to burn half our fuel and override FTL cooling protocols." "You'll melt the jump cores," his adjutant warned. Trent didn't blink. "Do it. But sir, do it." Because Trent knew this wasn't about strategy anymore. This was redemption. Or ruin. The Revenants didn't slow. Their dropship bled into Drathion's outer gravity like oil into water. No signals, no warnings. Inside, Revenant Prime stood silent, helmet on, visor black as night. He stared at the map projection of the Belt's refugee cluster. His gauntlet pulsed once, an old memory surfacing. A firestorm above Europa. Screams. Betrayal. To him, this place smelled the same. "Same silence," he muttered. "Same weakness. Same mistake." No one in his squad replied. They didn't speak anymore. Only Prime did. And only when it mattered. "We purge it," he said. The dropship adjusted course. Trent's ship exploded out of folded space, hull screaming, engines overheating, warning sirens howling across the deck. But they made it. The Sovereign Ash dropped between the Revenants and the refugee cluster, shielding them like a final wall of flesh and metal. "Power down," Trent ordered. "No weapons, no targeting, just comms." His officers looked at him like he was insane. "You want to talk to them?" "No," Trent said softly. "I want to reach him." The Revenant ship stopped. For the first time in 12 days they paused. And then a signal came in. "Director." No encryption, no firewalls, just a single line of live feed audio. Trent stepped forward, into the chamber. The only thing between him and the end of everything. "You don't need to do this," he said. "There are children in there. They'll grow up to betray us." Revenant Prime replied, cold and absolute. "You don't know that. I didn't know it about them either. Then this is vengeance, not justice." A long silence. Then Revenant Prime spoke again, slower this time, almost distant. "We were buried alive for doing what needed to be done. We watched Earth break under its own weight, and you let it happen." Trent stepped forward, closer to the feed, voice shaking now. "You're right. We failed. We hesitated. We bled too long. But we learned. We built again. We brought you back because we thought we'd have control this time." Another pause. "You didn't bring us back," Prime said. "You unlocked us. That's different." And then his voice dropped. "But you came here, alone, no fleet, no fire, just words," Trent whispered. "Because I still believe we're human, even after everything." The line went dead. The Revenant ship hovered in silence. Then, without a word, turned. They didn't destroy the refugees. They didn't destroy Trent. They left. In the weeks that followed, no one knew where the Revenants went. No signal, no trace, no explanation. Some say they returned to the ice vault, sealed themselves back into the dark. Others say they roamed the outer black, watching, judging, waiting. But the galaxy never forgot what happened. They never forgot what Earth had created. Because now they knew, if you push humanity too far, you don't get diplomats, you don't get heroes, you get monsters, and they only needed 60 seconds.